Okay, I'm going to do my part really quickly and kind of explain and lay the groundwork for what Prairie Fire was. A lot of this is going to come off our first presentation, where I thought it was an excellent presentation of the war in Southeast Asia, and thank you for doing that. It was a wonderful deal. I had the honor of flying both the OV-10 and the A-1 in the Southeast Asia War, so I'm one of the few guys who got to do that. I actually had gotten an A-1 Sky Raider out of pilot training. The skinny guy there is me. That was some pounds ago. And after I graduated from pilot training, it turned out that the Air Force decided that they wanted no more lieutenants flying the A-1, which is kind of funny, because later on in my career it was nothing but A-1 drivers who were lieutenants. So very interesting time. But the short story was I was sent to the OV-10, which was fine with me. I went to the OV-10, got checked out in that, and then basically found myself at NKP at this time in the 23rd TAS as an OV-10 forward air controller. Okay, we had a great presentation really in the Ho Chi Minh Trail, so I'll be fast on this, but basically it was key to really what Prairie Fire and MAC-SOG, the Special Forces participation in the war in Laos basically is about. So I'm just going to cover those high points. Again, we've talked about the fact that in 1954 our goal was to prevent a war in Southeast Asia, so to that reason we came together and signed the Geneva Peace Accords. And the idea was, as President Eisenhower has pointed out, that he thought the greatest threat to peace in Southeast Asia was Laos, and so he wanted Laos to remain as neutral as it could. So part of the Geneva Accords were that all foreign troops would be withdrawn by Laos. You heard that a little earlier today. Being good troops in the United States, we immediately pulled out all of our forces, okay? However, the North Vietnamese kept a huge number of troops after the Geneva Accord in Laos at the time. I won't bother you with the maps again that you've seen. You know where the countries are by this time. Predictably, however, after we left, North Vietnam decided to really have an invasion of South Vietnam. So they invaded the South. And their big challenge was to try to get war materials from North Vietnam unloaded at Haiphong Harbor all the way down into South Vietnam. Had a hell of a problem, and standing right in the middle of it was the DMZ at that period of time. So they couldn't just get in a truck and drive all the way down, right down the whole thing. So they did the smart thing and said, let's take a right turn and go into neutral Laos, which is what they did. And thus the red arrows indicate the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Now, I had a neighbor, when I was talking about the Ho Chi Minh Trail, say, yeah, I know all about that. My cousin one time walked that all the way from Georgia to Maine. You know? I'm not sure the American public knows a whole lot about the Ho Chi Minh Trail, obviously. But obviously, North Vietnam had to move those supply lines into the south. And the answer again was Laos, because there was no strong government there. It supposedly was neutral. There was no political opposition whatsoever. And we had skedaddled out of the country. So the international community basically threw their hands up and ignored the North Vietnamese invasion and incursion into Laos. Thus was born the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And the name was, you heard about it earlier today, but a very interesting network of trails that basically started out in Haiphong Harbor and went all the way down through Laos and down into South Vietnam. Now, we all know that Russian and Warsaw Pact cargo ships could offload weapons in Haiphong Harbor absolutely unrestrained throughout the entire war. So they could bring them in, unload them, no problem whatsoever. And for fear of a big war with Russia or China, our government decided not to intercede at all with Haiphong Harbor, so the ships were never bombed until the very end of the war. Here's a photo of Haiphong Harbor with lots of trips, lots of ships there unloading supplies from the Soviet Union, the Warsaw Pact, to go directly to the North Vietnamese. Again, the neutral country of Laos, you've seen all the maps. For those of you that have never seen it, it's a hell of a place. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's beautiful. It's Jurassic Park. That's what you need to think about, okay? It's just a beautiful place, but not a great place to choose for a war. So for those of us that were there, it was all triple canopy jungle for the most part, limestone mountains karst, very few infrastructure, roads, railroads, bridges, no industry, no agriculture to speak of, and it was quite a primitive place. Lots of low water crossings like they had when I grew up in Texas that passed for bridges. Not a lot of bridges, however. Well, the Ho Chi Minh Trail, the main part of the Ho Chi Minh Trail, as it turned out, was made up of about 625 miles long, that was the length, and in that was an infrastructure of about 12,000 miles of parallel dirt roads. It was quite complex all the way down. And it was highly organized, and each section of those dirt roads was organized into bintrams, which were 10 to 15 mile segments that were controlled by a particular organization that would drive their supplies through that bintram and then pass it on to others. At any one given time, and this is intel from today basically, there were probably 3,000 trucks on the trail at every good time. And it took them about 2 weeks to make the entire passage from north to south or vice versa. But if you had to walk it, which many, many, many brave North Vietnamese soldiers did, it took about 3 hellish months to walk all the way down, and they certainly did. About 2 million North Vietnamese troops went down the trail. They moved 45 million tons of war materials, 400,000 weapons, 6 million rounds of ammunition. Their basic plan for those of us that fought the war against the trail was to drive all night. Not a lot of movement going on in the daytime. It wasn't very smart. And then in the daytime, they hid in spider holes or camo ramps that were driven into the Ho Chi Minh Trail, where they would hide, waiting for darkness to come. Okay. Again, organized into bintrams or segments. Each driver would work the same segment, passing cargo from one bintram to another. They knew every inch of their segment. They could drive it with no lighting whatsoever. They knew every time a curve was coming up or whenever something would come about. Okay. Bulldozers all up and down the route structure for repairs. And dedicated troops of any kind, as you heard earlier, that would keep the cargo moving by any amount. Whenever we'd move some of the dirt around on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, they would put it right back with shovels, bulldozers, and whatever they needed to do. They also monitored our radios all the time when we were putting in strikes at night. They had a very simple system of lights on the Ho Chi Minh Trail that basically said drive or stop. And when we had an inbound strike that was announced on one of our strike frequencies, they turn on the red lights and the guys would dive into one of their ramps and hide. And foolishly, for those of you that fought the war over there, we didn't change our frequencies very often, so they were quite good at monitoring when an airstrike was going to come in. They had a complete fuel storage and transmission system up and down the whole Ho Chi Minh Trail. They had big storage tanks of POL inside of caves and very, very sophisticated fuel lines to provide that POL. These are contemporary pictures, by the way. These are left over and were taken in recent years, but a very, very complete infrastructure on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Okay. And as we mentioned earlier, almost instantaneously repaired anything that we would do. And of course, for those of us that were there, an endless supply of radar-guided Russian anti-aircraft systems, big guns, surface-to-air missiles, and again, savage opposition is the best I can say from skilled gunners. These were not rookies. Okay. There were over 100,000 NVA troops who manned the trail just for the defense of the trail. These weren't the people moving supplies, so they were great gunners, and they were ready to fight at any one given time. Okay. For the NVA, remember, this was a war to reunite their nation, both north and south, as we pointed out earlier today. It was not really just simply a guerrilla war in the south. It was a big effort to try to reunite the north with the south, and they saw this as an extremely important mission. And this is a translated statement that they did in propaganda, but blood may flow, but supplies must never stop. Okay. So how did we fight the air war against the trail? Well, LBJ had absolutely no taste, as you heard earlier again, about sending troops to cut the trail. And quite frankly, I think almost anybody who has studied the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and actually the war in Southeast Asia, understands that the only effective way to actually stop traffic on the Ho Chi Minh Trail was boots on the ground. Very difficult to do that from the air, almost impossible. But politically, like Nixon, LBJ was absolutely not going to fight that battle. He wanted to get reelected, so he just kind of pretended that nothing was really going on in Laos. And our great friend McNamara was sure that technology could do the job. So why put troops in there when we can have all kinds of gadgets and things that could basically stop the flow of traffic on the Ho Chi Minh Trail? Thus, we fought what we call the secret war, those of us who were there, And it was secret only because we knew that if we were to put troops in there or to have active combat, it was in violation of the Geneva Accords. And even though the North Vietnamese could care less about the Geneva Accords, we seemed to be quite sensitive politically about doing that. Okay. I want to put this into light about what it was like flying over the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Occupied Europe in World War II was defended by over 10,000 anti-aircraft guns. That's a lot of guns. The NVA had at least that amount of guns. Maybe not quite as high a caliber, not so many 88s, but for those of us that were there, I can assure you that in particular parts of the trail, it was pretty startling, along with uncounted number of SAMs towards the end part of the war. In World War II, we dropped, the Allied forces dropped about 3.4 million tons of bombs on the Axis powers. That's Europe, that's Japan, that's the entire war. That's what the Allies dropped. However, in Laos, on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, over the course of the war, we dropped over 4 million tons on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which makes Laos the most heavily bombed place anywhere on Earth. Okay? It's a pretty dangerous place today. There's still a tremendous amount of unexploded ordnance, and I was part of the guys who was dispensing that. But it's a fairly dangerous place, and there's a lot of work being done today to mitigate that and clean up Laos. Our tacticians in Washington, D.C. decided that the way to really cut the trail, other than to not put in troops, was to come up with interdiction points. The idea being narrow passes, choke points where the trail was going to go through. And the idea was they knew the trucks were going to go through those narrow passes, so we're going to bomb them every day. And these were designated by the White House, and day and night these IDPs were bombed. Well, that solved a huge problem for the North Vietnamese, because instead of having to disperse their anti-aircraft weapons up and down the entire 625 miles or the 12,000 miles in the route structure, they simply went to our interdiction points, which you guys know well. We'll cover them in a minute, and there they are. We call them boxes. There was the Alpha box, the Bravo box, the Charlie box, Mugia, Ban Karai, Ban Ravine, and they were bombed around the clock. And as you've heard on some of these great presentations on the SARS, it was a very dangerous place for anything smacking of aviation to get anywhere near. Okay. This is a picture of Mugia Pass taken by an A1 driver, by the way. That's probably from about 5,000 feet. That's pretty close. But you know, it does look a little bit like the craters of the moon. So that's what all the boxes looked like as you flew into them. This is actually me in an OV-10. I think this was taken by my roommate, Johnny Ralston, who's sitting down front here. We were making smart, taking pictures of us. Now, Con Phanom was a most secret base for reasons that most of us didn't really know about. And the reason why were two areas of the base, one called Task Force Alpha, the other called Heavy Hook. Now I'll explain in just a minute about what that meant. All right, well, first of all, let's talk about Special Forces, MACV-SOG, Green Berets, in their battle against the trail, because that's really what this presentation is about. Okay? So essentially, Studies and Observation group was formed, and the idea of doing that was to have really an intelligence gathering force of special forces who would interdict the trail for specific intelligence gathering missions that could help in our battle against the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And again, in the whole time of our battle against the Ho Chi Minh Trail and in Laos, the only boots on the ground that we really had were the brave men of MACV-SOG, the Green Berets, who actually ran recon on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Well, it's a difficult thing to do to really surveil the Ho Chi Minh Trail because much of it, as you saw earlier, was covered by triple canopy jungle. So hard to tell when they were really there. McNamara had a wonderful idea one time by taking sonobuoys, which were the things that were dropped out of Navy sub-killers, painting them camouflage and dropping them on the Ho Chi Minh Trail because they would record sound. And when they would record the sound of trucks passing, they would then be bounced back to a huge data collection station at Nakhon Phanom, and voila, we would know where all the trucks were. So they did that. And so they went out and we dropped battery-powered sound sensors up and down the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Very dangerous work. They were dropping strings of sensors about 500 feet over the trail. Not a good thing to do straight and level, okay? Task Force Alpha was the data collection point on NKP where they gathered all of this sonobuoy information and ran it into a huge bank of computers where they would analyze it. Well, it's a long way from the Ho Chi Minh Trail line of sight to Nakhon Phanom where all the computers were and Task Force Alpha was. So how are they going to do that? Well, they came up with probably the best flying job in the Air Force, the QU-22B, which was essentially going to be a drone but wound up being manned, where some poor sucker had to get in his QU-22B and fly over the Ho Chi Minh Trail to have these sonobuoy sensors, their signals bounced all the way back off of his airplane to NKP where they would be recorded and analyzed. And at Task Force Alpha, that's exactly what they did. They would plot the targets, and every morning, as I can recall, as a truck killing fact, we'd get a frag that would say, last night we hit trucks that moved in the following coordinates. And there would be base camps, truck parks, a great deal of analysis of where the trucks are moving. So we said, this is great. We take off at first light and race out to those coordinates and look down. The only problem was we couldn't see through the trees. So we had absolutely no idea what really was going on down there, and it was a fairly senseless operation. So how do you mitigate that? How can you corroborate those sorts of things? Well, these are the guys who did it, and we've got Don with us today to talk about that. The only way to verify these targets and to tell what was going on was by really smart guys, tough guys, MACV, SOG, Special Forces, Green Berets, who ran recon on the ground, okay? Each one of the teams that was there, and I'll let them talk about it a little bit more, was made up basically of big people and little people. Big people being United States Green Beret forces, either enlisted or officers, and then a variety of indigenous forces that were allied with us that would be formed into teams that would then be infilled into the trail for a specific mission to see what kind of intel and gathering they could possibly do on the trail. And that mission was called Prairie Fire. Okay. On NKP, there was a special compound, the other one of the things that nobody knew anything about, that was called Heavy Hook. Heavy Hook was the home of Mobile Launch Team 3, which was a MACSOG operation that would actually bring in the teams that would be infilled onto the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and we would launch them out together as a big force and put them on an LZ somewhere very close proximity to the trail so they could do the specific missions that they were tasked to do. Now, those of us who flew Prairie Fire didn't really know what their mission was. Our mission was to get them on the ground and protect them and get them off the ground. We needed to do that, okay? So to that end, I mean, again, I was an OV-10 truck killing FAC and nail FAC, and one day I get approached and I thought, oh my God, the squadron commander knows my name, you know. And he said, we need to talk to you about something that you're going to volunteer for, and it's called being a Prairie Fire FAC. And very few of us had really any idea in the nails about what Prairie Fire FACs actually did. But I was given the great pitch, and I decided, okay, let's do that. They actually were Air Force FACs chosen by Studies and Observation Group guys, in this case Heavy Hook guys, for guys they thought they could trust to read them into the Prairie Fire mission to help do all the intelligence work to fly out and select the LZs with a Special Forces rider in the back seat. Those riders were called Covey riders after the Covey FACs over in Da Nang, okay? So even though I was a nail, we had Covey riders who went with us. 1971, these were the 6 Prairie Fire FACs in my unit. Pat McCaslin, Hoot Gibson, myself leaning back looking really young. Ted Stuckey, Jim Latham became a POW, and my replacement eventually was Danny Thomas, who was killed in action. Prairie Fire was not good for longevity, basically. So once chosen as a Prairie Fire FAC, we left our truck hunting thing and moved over to Heavy Hook, which we really liked because I must say, Don, that you guys know how to party. Okay? You really knew how to party, a lot better than we did in the Air Force. So life was good. So with that, what we did was basically join the teams and work up the intel to get ready to figure out exactly where they wanted to have an infill, where they wanted to drop, and we would fly sometimes 30 days straight with a Covey rider working up exactly how that mission was going to go. And when MACSOG was ready, They'd bring the team in, they'd bring them to Heavy Hook, and off we'd go. And that's a Covey rider right there in the black hat. And again, here's Army Special Forces Sergeant Gary Robb and Jim Latham, who was one of my Prairie Fire Facts with me. So once the team came in and we had a mission for them, and they knew where we were going, we all joined up. The team was loaded up. They took off in a CH-53, led by the Prairie Fire Fact with a Covey rider, escorted by usually 4 A1s. And that's how most of you guys knew the mission. I mean, we did a lot of Prairie Fire escort out of NKP. The guys at OLAA did a whole bunch of it, and that was their specific mission for a long time. But it was a very interesting mission because, like the SARs that we've been talking about today, Prairie Fire was a guaranteed SAR. You know, the only thing was you could wind up with not just 1 or 2 survivors, but you could wind up with a whole passel of survivors down there, and very quickly. So a very interesting job, I must add. So this is really a Prairie Fire Fact with a couple of A1s escorting him, going out towards the LZ. This is an actual picture leaning out of a CH-53 of me leading an infill in. A guy took a picture of me out there, and it was up to me and the Covey rider to get this whole gaggle to the right place at the right time. And we'd lead them in, we'd get them there, we'd put them on the ground, and off we would go. The war would basically start. These are some pictures from inside the CH-53 of this particular team. This was Recon Team Alaska, as I recall. They're in their web gear ready to go. We'd put them on the ground. This is looking down from the CH-53. Once they had jumped out and gone into the high elephant grass, these guys are ready to go with a vengeance, okay? I know I can push the right button. Keep practicing here. Okay, well, most of the time, for the first 3 or 4 hours after you put the team on the ground, the Prairie Fire Fact would back off. We'd go up to about 10,000 feet and back 20 miles away and sit there in orbit with all the gas we had remaining, and just monitoring. The Covey rider and I would sit there and monitor the team on the ground, because that's what we did. And when they went off to do their mission, we tried to provide as much overhead as we could all the time to make sure that they were safe and doing fairly well. So again, sometimes it was no problem, but usually all hell breaks loose. And after they were on the ground for a while, they'd get into trouble of some sort, and that would wind up with a Prairie Fire emergency, which had the same priority basically in pulling guys out of the jungle as a SAR did. And many of you were on Prairie Fire emergencies, I know. And we'd bring them out any way we possibly could. There were 64 OB-10s lost over Laos. Many of them were on Prairie Fire missions. So that's kind of a background of what Prairie Fire was to set the stages for these gentlemen. For myself, I went back to the A1 after I was through with Prairie Fire. Stayed at NKP and went back. My second tour was back with the hobos in the first SOS. There I am in a group picture up there. And again, I felt very, very, very lucky that I was able to fly as both a Prairie Fire Fact with Special Forces, and also to work as a hobo and as a Sandy later on. You know, I think about my colleagues frequently, as you all do, who never came back from Southeast Asia. We had an interesting project here in 2019. Ken Holston, myself, Brian Hookey, General Smith, and I came here and kind of spearheaded working with the Air Force Museum to restore that beautiful airplane that you saw yesterday. That was great. So I considered that labor of love was in honor of some of our colleagues who didn't come home. This is my beautiful family. I have 4 kids, 9 grandkids. But here's the point. Whenever I get together with them, I cannot escape in thoughts at 2 o'clock in the morning of my colleagues who never came home to have such a family. On the other hand, for those of us who were part of search and rescue operations and rescue specifically, I also reflect on the pride that I have for bringing those people home to have them enjoy exactly the same blessings that I had in such a family. So the things that I'm proudest of were my service in South Vietnam and my family. So I thank you, and I'll turn it over to you now.
I'd just like to say that's wonderful. You've given a really good synopsis of everything that leads into what we hope to talk about today. I'd like to ask General Warren to come up here and sit with us. He's going to be presenting as well, and I think we'll need another chair for that. And if we could have just a minute or two before I get my box and some other things that...
Sure, the show's yours now.
Okay. And do we need to have a break?
No break, we're going straight through, but as I said, when we get out of the room, if we're not out of here by 3 o'clock, they're going to charge each one of us $100 a seat.
Okay.
Sorry, 5 o'clock.
Okay. So I'll let Larry come on up here and we'll get a chair and we'll do that. I'll just say this for starters. We have a gap here. We have a gap here because you heard the very first A1 pilots that were in country were in the first ACS, and then you have had a gap and we've gone all the way to NKP, and you haven't really been brought along to understand what went on. First it would be the 6th SOS. And we have a gentleman over here, and he has had, flew 657 A1 missions. And if we have Win DePoorter, and Win has, it's just an amazing thing to me that he would have survived that much of exposure. 2 tours in the 6th SOS. And back in those days, things were a lot different. When you jumped into the NKP, things that we've heard so much about today. It's just different places, different missions, different things. Primarily, we were doing close arm air support. 6 did. I was in the 6 for a very brief period of time.
You want that ready right now?
And there was close air support missions in the Army.
You can go right now.
Are really special to me. I feel so good about them. And I was the first pilot to go out to one of their SOAR meetings that they have. They are very organized. I think they've been through a number of hotel rooms, some repelling, and maybe some ladies in other rooms and things in the early days.
What a shock.
Hate to break it to you. And when we got out there, I have a wonderful wife who just passed away 6 months ago, so I'm a little rattled about that, obviously. But she worked so hard to help me try to get this part of the history done. And we haven't talked about this very much. We've had many meetings at the Tennessee Air Museum, where Neil Melton has the most precious and best A1 that you've ever saw. So we're going to run a lot of pictures, and if you have questions about some of the pictures, it's not a coordinated deal like John was so good at doing, but we'll go ahead and we'll try to take care of that. And so I'd like Win if he would go ahead and just try to get us a basic introduction to how it was in the 6th. I think everybody we have here spent some time in the 6th. Jax Roberts, okay, Larry didn't, Doc Blanchard, and myself. And mine was very brief period of time. So Win, if you give us a little bit of your information and tell these people what you did, I'd really appreciate it.
Well, I was instructing in the A1 Skyraider at Hurlbut Field after serving my first tour, 325 missions, in the 602nd, based out of Benmore, Not Trang, Quinyon, Udorn, and NKP during that first tour. I pulled Alert out of NKP, both SAR Alert out of NKP in 1965. And it was a pretty rough go. There wasn't much. Oh, you're not hearing me? Can you hear me? Okay. Anyway, so I was had served my first tour there at those locations. Our squadron got moved around quite a bit, and of course the 602nd ended up stationed at NKP. But while we were pulling alert there, we'd send 4 birds out of Udorn, and then we had an old wooden shack that we set up shop and put our 4 airplanes out there on the PSP runway, and we had a few SAR scrambles. It was kind of the beginning of the search and rescue operation that we kind of, I guess, established the footprint for the mission and how it was to be conducted, and so I was there for the very, very beginning. And anyway, at Hurlbut Field, where I was instructing a lot of Vietnamese pilots and senior officers, I was at the bar one night at the Stag Bar. There was such a thing at that time. We had a real, honest to goodness, Stag Bar at Hurlbut. Anyway, I was approached by a gentleman by the name of Ford, and I didn't really know him at that time, but he said he knew me, or at least my reputation. And he asked me if I'd like to go back to Vietnam flying the A1H. Well, I'd never flown an H model, you know, the single seat version of the Skyraider, and I said, you betcha, I'd like to go back. And my marriage situation was not too stable at that time, so I was really glad to get back into combat. And so I joined the 6th Squadron. The name of the squadron is 6 SOS. We formed at England Air Force Base in Louisiana, and a big C-141 came in, and we all piled aboard the C-141 and flew to Pleiku. We had to stop in Alaska someplace and refueled, and ended up at Pleiku, the whole squadron on the airplane with Ford as our boss. And when we stepped off the airplane, he was immediately told that he was no longer the squadron commander of the 6th. And that was kind of disheartening. Poor Ford, he ended up getting shot down and killed. He was kind of disheartened about the whole thing. Anyway, we were at Pleiku, and I knew absolutely nothing about this prairie fire business or anything having to do with the SOG mission. In fact, I learned all the things that I knew about the SOG mission about 30 years later when I read the book. We were flying and supporting the Special Forces teams that were going in, but we really didn't have an appreciation for the effectiveness or the necessity of the effectiveness for getting those guys in and out. We were operating in the southern part of Laos, and there were things going on out of NKP that you were just briefed on that we had no idea about. We were called upon when there were trouble and needed usually help, support, and extraction. We had very little to do with inserting those teams down in the southern part of Laos, but we were on alert, and we were called upon to provide air support for their extractions. And I can tell you, I saw the picture up here where they were using, what is that outfit called, a McGuire, where they lift them out on a rope?
McGuire rig.
Sometimes, yeah, McGuire rig. I saw that a few times where we were trying to support the teams and get them out safely. That was quite an operation. I just could not believe what I was seeing with my own eyes when they lifted out 2 or 3 guys on a rope. Wow. Anyway, my experience, I have some really interesting personal experiences that if we had time, I would love to tell you about. And you would be quite entertained, I think. I don't think there's a soul in here that knows the things that I have been through in my 657 missions. You can imagine. I'll give you one real quick one. On my first tour in the 602nd, made a wing landing at Benoit, and my leader was how many of you ever heard the name Vasiliadis? You know Charles Vasiliadis? Just passed away fairly recently. What a hero. He was my mentor. I really love that guy. Anyway, I was on his wing. I landed at Benoit and ran into him and destroyed 2 airplanes. Who do you reckon was in his right seat on his first mission in Vietnam? Butch Vasilio. Anybody ever heard of Butch Vasilio? Well, he was on his first ride. And so that's just one of the stories that I could tell you about. The other very interesting story would be my last mission, my 657. I didn't know it was my last until I landed, but it was close to being, you know, the end of my tour, and it turned out to be my very last mission when I came back from a combat mission and couldn't get the gear down. The gear would not extend. And after a period of about, I guess an hour, hour and a half of flying around on autopilot over the airport at Pleiku, and unstrapping and getting down around the rotor pedals with my head and doing some mechanical work on the airplane, relayed to me by people on the ground. I was able to finally get the landing gear down and landed safely, and that was my very last mission, 657. Anyway, I volunteered to come here and talk, and I really don't have an awful lot to, you know, we played a very minor role on inserting teams, supporting teams. We were in the southern part. The things that were going on out of NKP, I had no idea about your operation. I really didn't. The only time we were called upon was when the teams needed help, and we supported teams. I didn't really understand what that was all about until 30 years later when I read the book. There are a couple of names in the book that were familiar because they were in my squadron. But that was kind of one of our missions, was supporting the team. And I first met some of the guys that we were working with several years ago in Sevierville, Tennessee, when they had a reunion of a bunch of those kind of guys and a few of our Skyraider pilots. And it was just an amazing enlightenment on my part to learn about the SOG mission. I didn't know. Here we were supporting this thing and flying in support when we were called upon, because we had airplanes on alert there at Pleiku, occasionally called upon to help. Well, sometimes, very seldom, but occasionally we helped escort the infiltration, or not the infiltration, but what's the term you use for putting the teams on the ground? Insertions. And we supported that. We did lose a few airplanes in support of that, and we bombed that damn Ho Chi Minh Trail and tried to we tried to operate daytime and crater the roads and come back the next day, and they'd already repaired them all, and the traffic was flowing. There wasn't anything we could do to stop that, but we worked at it. And I'm glad to be here, folks. I'll tell you some stories if you want to hear them. Don't have a thing to do with Special Forces or the SOG mission or Prairie Fire. I'm happy to be here. Thank you very much.
I think that's a great lead-in to have Doug talk to us and try to explain what SOG missions were all about, and we'll go through that part of it. We have pictures that are being flashed up here on the screen. If any of them get your attention, maybe take a little break and think about it. I'd like to explain some of the things and answer any questions that you have about that. A lot of these are my photos, or some of them are. Rich Benjamin, thanks to again to the Tennessee Museum of Aviation, Neil and Ron Melton. I became friends with Neil. We're going to drive out to SOAR this year and meet you guys again. I was the first person that actually got real interested in one of my missions that I can say I personally saved as much as we save. And I would say Bernie Fisher is the only guy who can say he saved people without a helicopter, basically. He had his own mode of doing that. But we worked with the Army helicopters, we worked with Jolly Greens, we did search and rescue missions. It was just so much of it was just put together in the same fashion as what you've been describing. So once we understand what SOG is, and I'm sure a lot of people don't understand that, a little bit more than what John went through, then let's do that. And Doug, please.
Thank you very much. On 30 August 1968, I was a junior man on RT Georgia. There were 3 Americans on our recon team. The 1-0, our team leader, Tom Cofield. The 1-1, the assistant team leader. And the 1-2, that was me. I was the junior man. We had Brew Montagnards on our team, 6 of them, and we had 1 ARVN sergeant. We had been in a very hotly disputed area, which I didn't know about before. They didn't really tell me about that. But no team had stayed in this area for more than a day in the last 6 months. The areas that we were typically, it was a very small area. For instance, you've heard about Chapone today. Well, from Quezon to Chapone is only about 30 miles. It's a very small area. You can get helicopters and OV-10s and fast movers from Da Nang and from NKP pretty quickly. We were typically on a 5-day mission to explore a 10-click area, looking for the bad guys, looking for the signs of the trail. If we found any convoys, call instant fire on them if we could get Hillsborough to agree to it. So about 10 o'clock in the morning of our last day, we're waiting for our exfiltration. We heard a couple of warning shots, that's it. But the weather was terrible. It was IFR weather. Tom, my team leader, made the commo check at 6 a.m. And about 10 o'clock, we were just waiting for the weather to clear when we were attacked. It's later estimated it's about a reinforced platoon. We think we got hit by about 40 or 50 guys in the little 100 at the bottom of the hill. I was standing in the middle of the perimeter next to Stan Seating, who was killed immediately. Because I was the perimeter, I couldn't fire my car-15. The bad guys started throwing hand grenades into the perimeter. I picked them up and threw them back, established a firing position. After we repulsed them, I had already called a Prairie Fire emergency. I had the radio and was calling in for some A1E support if we could get it. 2 helicopters were waiting, 2 Army helicopters were waiting to get us out to extract us. When they heard they were under fire, they came after us in 0 visibility weather. They navigated to our position on a hill by hitting their skids on the top of the trees. Ladies and gentlemen, I owe my life to helicopter pilots, to slip pilots, and the A1Es and the Cobra pilots who supported it. Without them, I am not here. We managed to get to an LZ, to a position where the helicopters could land and pick us up. I was carrying stand, I was carrying the radio, I was carrying the Car 15. I had a grenade that I pulled the pin on that I hadn't been able to throw yet. I don't know how I carried all this stuff. You do a lot of weird things when you're under fire. Got into the helicopter. The medic tried to put a line in the stand. It was flat. He was dead. I didn't know it. I kept trying to revive him. One of our indig brew, Kumba his name, he had a hole through his shoulder you could see through. I told the pilot, I said, we're going to the hospital at Linktree. We landed there and we took our brew off and said, we need this guy to be treated. And the Army personnel said, no, we don't treat indigenous personnel. We locked and loaded and told him, you're going to treat him and you're going to treat him now. They did. He got treatment. We got back to Mylock, which was our, where we had a little camp that had come from Quezon. It's not far from Quezon. That's where we had launched from, a launch site belonging to CCN, Command and Control North out of Da Nang. And when I got there, I was talking to the helicopter pilot, and I realized there was something going on in my shoulder. I said, you know, I just need to figure out what's going on in my shoulder. Well, I had shrapnel in my left arm and shrapnel in my shoulder. And the helicopter pilot says, after I had enough dressing on, it looked like the entire hospital sheet had been arrested, put on me. He said, you didn't know you were hurt? I said, sir, you saved my life. I don't care about this damn stupid wound. I care that Stan got killed, our Arbin Sergeant got killed, but you could have gotten killed. Ladies and gentlemen, I was in the 5th Special Forces Group, operationally attached to MACV SOG. MACV SOG, we talked about the Ravens. I heard about the horrendous casualties they suffered, especially in 1972. MACV SOG's operational numbers, TO&E, were about 300 at any point in 1968 when we had 500,000 troops in Vietnam. Special Forces had 3,000. We were 10% of Special Forces. We did not report to the 5th Group in Nha Trang. We reported to the SOG commander in Saigon, who reported to the Department of State, Department of Defense. Again, because the Ravens I told you before, because we're not supposed to be in Laos, we didn't report to MACV headquarters in Saigon. We reported to Washington. Of those 300 troops, in 1968, we had months where we had 50% KIAs. Teams went in, didn't come back. Our teams got wiped out on the ground or wiped out the next day. In 1968, MACV SOG averaged 2 wounds per man. We had 2 WA for every guy. We had more casualties in our unit than any other Army unit since the Civil War. Special Forces received more Medal of Honors, man for man, than any other unit in the Vietnam War. MACV SOG received more Medal of Honors, MACV in man for man, than any unit, including Special Forces. I'm extremely proud to have been a MACV SOG trooper. I had no idea at the time what we were doing. No idea. I had no idea about the machinations of the State Department, the Defense Department. I knew we weren't supposed to be in Laos. Like the Ravens, we dressed like we weren't American soldiers. We had fatigues on, but we didn't have name tags, we didn't have dog tags, no identification, nothing on our person. Like the NBA or the VC, we're going to look at a 20-year-old blonde kid like me and think I could have possibly been a VC or an indigenous person. I mean, it's so silly, it's unbelievable. You saw on the screen that Goldie put up of the heavy hook guys. One was Mike Taylor, who's then known as Captain Mike Taylor. That was his email address. Lieutenant Colonel Mike Taylor unfortunately passed away early this year, and I had the honor of speaking at his funeral at the Punch Bowl. Mike Taylor was served in Southeast Asia for 42 months, including a lot of time as a cubby rider for Goldie. He was a legendary soldier. He organized the HALO operation, high altitude, low opening parachute operations in Southeast Asia, which is some of the stupidest things I ever heard of. Can you imagine jumping 18,000 feet, opening up your parachute at maybe 1,500 feet, 2,000 feet. By the time you landed, and Cliff Newman, who spoke at Mike's funeral, also was one of them who did. They had a 3-man team. They couldn't even find each other after they had landed through triple canopy foliage. We had a lot of stupid things, but a lot of brave guys. You also saw a guy misidentified as Sergeant Gary Robb. Gary Robb was a lieutenant, may have been a captain. He was an artillery officer. And he was also, he led a team of North Vietnamese who deserted and went to the south. And they were so loyal to Mike, they wouldn't go out with anybody else. Excuse me, so loyal to Gary. There was also a picture of your friend and my friend, Jim Latham. Jim Latham was at Heavy Hook and inserted teams. He later drove fast movers and was shot down over North Vietnam and was a captured prisoner. Jim, the retired brigadier general, is on our POW MIA committee. Every one of you who flew in Laos in support of SOG is eligible to join our organization, the Special Operations Association. The only qualification is you have to have been in a unit that fought behind enemy lines, and you have personally done that yourself. So if you're in the Big Red 1 and didn't fight, you can still be in the Big Red 1 association. But in our association, you have to show that you fought behind enemy lines with an organization that, like Ravens, that fought behind enemy lines, and we'd be glad to have you come. Don has come to our SOAR, our reunion. General Warren has been in our reunion. We thank you. I know we have members of the Air Command Association on our board. We have an aircraft crewman on our board. We are very, very glad to have our air partners with us. Air partners were very important to us. Let me talk to you a little bit about the POW issue, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the origin of SOG and how we got there. There are about, and I think this was all mentioned, about 1,500 MIAs from Vietnam, missing in action, out of, what, 4 million troops, something like that. Of those, 150 belong to MACV SOG and the air partners who tried to rescue them on bright light missions. 50 MACV SOG troopers are dead, 100 of our air partners died trying to find them on what we call a bright light mission. A bright light mission was our team was under attack, our team was needed to be extracted. It's a Prairie fire emergency, plus getting a team that's almost dead out. And when the air partners came in to a bright light or a Prairie fire extraction, they knew they were going to get shot at. They were already under fire. Extremely brave pilots, extremely brave crews. And with the 2 slicks that rescued me on August 30, 68, all they had was a couple of M60s on each ship. MACV SOG started, like the whole Laos disaster started, by this effort of the U.S. to hide any activity we were doing in Laos. On the Army side, we had an operation called White Star in Laos in 1962. And we know that Ravens came in shortly thereafter. So the head of the CIA, Mr. Colby, William Colby, was trying to find a way to get intelligence about the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and he couldn't do it because most of it's in Laos, and we're not supposed to be in Laos. He even hired at one time French plantation owners near Khe Sanh to go over to Chapon and try to get whatever intelligence they could. They didn't trust the indigenous Vietnamese to give us good intelligence. It was always a problem in Vietnam, which one of the indigenous people you're going to trust. We always trusted the Montagnards because the Vietnamese hated them. They were mistreated, still are mistreated by the Vietnamese. They're different ethnically, and the Montagnard's always happy to shoot a Vietnamese, whether he's a North Vietnamese or a South Vietnamese. So Colby was looking for some way to get intelligence, so they come up with this Kaka theme of putting Green Beret soldiers in teams with indigenous soldiers with no name tags and so forth, and we would be inserted into these 10 click by 10 click areas and report back what we'd find. Well, we found the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Now what are we going to do with it? Now we had to do with Ambassador Sullivan in Vientiane, known to the pilots as Bastard Sullivan, because he was the one who controlled any activity that we're going to lay down. Simply because we found a convoy, but it wasn't shooting at us, we couldn't lay anything on it. We had to go through Hillsborough, call them at night, and see what assets are available. Now, if we got shot at, then we could call in our own air power. It was unbelievably stupid. We had I had a briefing once as a very young soldier with a 2-star Air Force general in Saigon. He said, we want you to go to Mugia Pass. And I said, what do you want to do? I had a brand new 1-0 who had never been in combat. He was, well, it was a name for a guy like that, but I can't use it in front of a female company. And he was very gung-ho. He was very gung-ho. Yes, sir, what are we going to do? I said, sir, talking to the general, what's up on that northwest quadrant you want us to go? Well, we don't know. Sergeant, that's why we're sending you here. Well, have you had any other teams in there? Well, we had some indigenous teams that didn't speak English, and they had these little radios you hit for trucks and hit for troops and so forth. What happened to them? Well, they didn't come back. What's in the Northeast Quadrant? Well, there's a battalion of troops there. Well, you saw some pictures of the Mugia Pass. What's in the Southeast Quadrant? Well, there's another battalion of troops there. How about the Southwest? Well, there's another battalion of troops there. And you don't know what's in the Northwest Quadrant, sir? I said, I do. My old friends, the 5th NVA Panzer Division. That's what we call the bad guys. There's some NVA people. There's lots of them, and we're probably going to get shot up. So my new 1-0 first lieutenant, he's all rah-rah. I went back and talked to my brew team. My brew team saved my life, as you have saved my life as well. My brew team said, Trung C, Vietnamese Sergeant, we're not going out with this lieutenant. I said, okay. We had a training mission, and the lieutenant accidentally fell out of a helicopter about 10 feet and broke his leg. So he didn't go on the mission with us. And we had to have people who we trusted with our lives on every day. And we trusted every member of the SOS, every A1E flyer, because they dedicated their lives to us, and 100 of them paid with their lives. Someone mentioned Robert McNamara and some of his inane, silly things he was going to do. He was going to put those sensors on the trail. Well, I was in the DMZ once. We got shot out right away, and we were supposed to look in our AAR report on the flora and the fauna. What did the plants look like? And I'm going, what are you doing? I came back. It was a very interesting mission. I came back and I had blood from my waist to my feet. I wasn't shot. The leeches got me, okay? And I had, we always spray stuff all over our pants, and then we would tape our pants inside the boots, but the leeches got in there anyways. And we got shot out. We came out on what are called Swiss seats. Swiss seats are like the McGuire rig, only it's a series of ropes you put around your waist, attach it to it, and go up. So on each side of the slick, there's 2 ropes. You put one guy on one side, one on the other, so the slick is pulling 4 guys out of the jungle. And on the other side of me, on the other side of the rope, was a Montagnard. Now, I was a lot thinner then, but I was still a lot heavier than any Montagnard. And I had the 25-pound Prick 25 radio on my back. And when the helicopter went up, I went down and the Montagnard went up on the other side. So he's just below the slicks. I'm 30 feet down, and my radio transmitter had been ripped off, so I couldn't call the pilot and say, hey, there's a little bit of an issue. So we're up at 3,000 feet, getting taken into, I think it was Linktree again. And the poor pilot, it's not his fault, the poor guy. He didn't know that I'm hanging 30 feet below the other guys. We headed towards this concrete culvert, and I'm trying to climb up this thing like a gymnast. I'm not that athletic, but something like that will make you move. And when we hit the strip, I was dragged along the ground, and so some people on the ground yelled at the pilot. The pilot came out and said, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I said, there's nothing you could do. It would happen. Mr. Murphy showed up. Mr. Murphy showed up on a lot of missions. You never know when Mr. Murphy's going to show up. He was a great guy. He pulled me out of a fire. Well, the one thing I want to tell the helicopter pilots, I'll never understand how you guys can hover while you're getting shot at. I never understood that. One of the reasons I joined the Army and not the Navy is I figured at least I could run. Okay, at least I could run away if they're shooting me. You guys don't run. You sit there and hover while you're getting shot. We heard so many stories about it. The bravery of helicopter pilots is unbelievable. The fast mover guys always made fun about them. They were the pilots of the Air Force. I think it was Don that's told us that he was in Da Nang and a B-52 pilot had to land. He had some kind of malfunction. And the captain of the B-52 came into the Oak Club and said, here we are, the pilots of the airport. And Don and a bunch of A1E guys were sitting there, and they threw beer all over them. Welcome to A1E. I have so many things I'd like to talk about, but there are so many other things that we want to talk about too. The helicopter pilots, again, are my heroes. They're the heroes of the Special Operations Association. We'd love to have you come out, and I will live. I've also been a trial lawyer. I'm used to a judge saying, Mr. Godshall, you have 5 minutes left. Don't use all of it. Thank you very much. I've been glad to talk to you, Everett. Remember Mac Fesog and the Green Berets, and the Green Berets always remember the helicopter pilots of the SOS and the A1Es who supported them. Thank you.
I'd like to add a pitch to that by saying that I'm a life member of the SOA, very important to me, and I try to get to SOAR whenever I can. I encourage any of you that flew that mission and did that to join the Special Operations Association. It's a great outfit. And one travelogue, by the way, Johnny Ralston, stand up, you're a hero, yeah. We are going to Chaponne on foot, no, actually in a four-wheel drive vehicle, full of beer this November. So we'll give you a complete travelogue from NKP. We're going right down Highway 9. We're going to Fire Base Lolo, and we're going straight to Chaponne. Thanks.
So I think I'd like to have a little bit more talk about the 6th, and then we'll get to OLAA, which is another situation that occurred. And I was only in the 6th for about a month, and then shipped to NKP, and I have an orange flight suit, so I was a Firefly, but to be honest about it, it was a bit much for me. And as far as we got to get you a party flight suit, like that was a major priority. We worked all the time. I worked, Jim Wold wrote up in reports that I have, which are over there. We don't have water bottles over here and a few other things because I had to go to the bathroom, sorry. But what I would like to talk about is how the impact of working for these Army guys gets me really emotional, because they are just the neatest guys, the hardest fighting people, and they are so much better organized, I hate to say this, than any Air Force thing that I ever was involved with. When you go out to SOAR, they got their stuff together, and Jax has been there, and Doc has been there, and Larry's been there, and maybe you guys have any disagreement with what I'm saying there, and you get to meet these guys, and you think, who would do this? And they aren't at all like what I might have thought they would be when I started to meet them. And I got really attached to that. So I was the first one to go out there, and I had about 5 guys with us that showed up. And Tiltmeyer was the president of the SOA at that time. And I wasn't too surprised about this because I had conversations with him. But when we walked up there, first of all, there had been some contention because they wanted to have our guys come and join them. And some of the people in the hierarchy of the SPADs, or the A1 pilots, you had to prove to them that you had flown their missions and did the work that these guys did. And we get this, we don't have to prove anything to anybody, you know, we're the SPAD pilots, and that sort of attitude to some people. And I never felt that way. And when we went out there, and Tilt walked up to us and he said, "You finally got here." And he said, "We thought you were all dead." And that's because of the situation that nobody would come. And so I'm proudly a member, full-time member, life member, and several of the other guys here are. And so we have made many forays out there to their group and their organizations. And that's been life-changing for me. I'd like Jax, if you want to talk a little bit. Jax is in the 6th more than I was, I guess the longest one in the 6th, about the same time as Jim Wold was there. So let me hand you the mic for a second.
Am I here? Okay. Doug, well, when Doug started to tell the story about the B-52 guy, and I was reminded of, I thought he was going to tell this one. There was, I think it was a Thud pilot, single seat, single engine, and he had a rough running engine, and he called in to declare an emergency. And the tower said, well, you know, just slow down, we got a B-52 with an engine out coming in. And he says, the dreaded 7-engine approach. Don talked me into going to this first SOAR event that we ever went to, and I was reluctant. You know, I'll come for one night. I said, I'll come for one night, and boy, I was there for the whole thing, and I've been back every chance I got. And the thing that struck me the most is we had our little booth set up, and guys would come up and say, and Don had some big banners. You've seen them out on the table out there. And they'd say, you flew that airplane? And I said, yeah. He said, you saved my life. And he said, this is not an exaggeration. I would have no children, no grandchildren. And it's like I was in tears, you know, and so was he. And I said, well, what year were you there? And he said, 66. And I said, I was still in college in 66. But he said, no, the airplane. But one of the things that Don has always preached is when an Air Force pilot got shot down, the war stopped, everything went towards pulling him out. But if there was 6 guys on the ground in the Army, it's like, well, you know, we'll see what we can do for you. We'll see if we can. And Don has always said that that was the whole wrong approach. And one of the things, this is my last little thing. One of the things that I learned going to these reunions was frequently what we call, if you were out of ammunition, you'd call them, we're Winchesters, we're going home. And they'd say, hey, you know, can you just hang around and make a few dry passes? And at first I, wasn't sure what the benefit of that was, but they filled me in. They said, you know, first of all, your engine noise like triples when you're in a dive, and that scared him. And he said that the enemy had one of 2 reactions. They'd either look up or fall on the ground and hide. And he said either one of those activities was just enough that we could sneak into the bush and get away. So dry passes rank high in my book.
I spent very little time at the 6th SOS in Pleiku, just like Don, before we got pulled back to NKP, where I spent the better part of 2 months, I think. And then they asked for volunteers to go back and man another squadron at Pleiku, and all but one of the guys who had been there decided to go back. It was a good place to be, but then I was young enough, I was a brown bar when I first got there. We all were, I think, yeah. And so they didn't trust us to do anything except drop bombs like we had trained for back at Hurlburt Field. And we got to be pretty good at that, because all us junior guys ever did was go out and do interdiction. Probably very little close air support at that time, as I recall. But anyway, then we got moved up to Da Nang and formed our OLAA, Operating Location Alpha Alpha, and that's when we got directly involved with MACV SOG. And a lot of people always thought it was Special Operations Group, and that was not correct. It was, as has already been said, Studies and Observations Group. And they picked that name because it was so boring that the news media they knew the news media would not be interested in it and not cover it. And I'll just say a couple of things. One about SOAR. We supported these guys when they were down on the ground, when they were being inserted and exfilled, but we never saw them. They went to a different base, and we came back to Da Nang and went to the Oak Club and got drunk every night. So when we first got to SOAR, which is, by the way, is in a casino in Vegas, if there's no other incentive to go out there to SOAR, that's one. We met these guys for the very first time, and Don's been able to piece together some missions that we personally were on and meet the guys who were down on the ground that we were able to keep the bad guys away from and get them extracted. And they are forever grateful for that. I remember just one mission I'll talk about was a prairie fire emergency, meaning the team was already in the jungle and they had been found and they needed to get the hell out of there ASAP. So we scrambled. We always had 2 alert birds ready to go, and scrambled out there, and they were in trouble. They had bad guys all over them, and they said, they marked their position with just a shiny, bright piece of canvas. And I spotted it, and they wanted us to make some passes really close, because when the A1s came in, they told us that the bad guys would try to get in, move in as close as they could to the good guys' position, because that would prevent us, hopefully, from dropping our ordnance on them. But they said, drop it close, and we were dropping it really close. As a matter of fact, my wingman apparently misidentified the position. He dropped his CBU right on top of them. And they said, knock it off, knock it off. You're dropping on top of us. And I said, okay, is everybody all right? And he said, well, we're okay. One of the guys is wounded, one of the mountain yards, and everybody else was okay, and the bad guys cleared out. And so that was a very, very rewarding mission, and I would have to say that just about every one of our missions was very much like that, and we flew hundreds of those.
Don, we're going to have to wrap it up here.
I understand. You've been there before. We worked in the weeds, and I'm telling you, we were low all the time. And with the teams, you had to do that. You couldn't drop the stuff we dropped. We had special loads. We dropped CBU 25. We tended to unfin napes. We had guys come over to us from NKP. Tom Stump was one guy. He missed the mountain the first time on his nape drops because he'd never been so low. And he was a hero in tailwind. And we just don't have the time to even talk about it. So I would say a couple of things. You should read books about SOG. We have a video that OLAA explained, and with Jim Wold Day. Jim Wold was we got the enlisted lieutenant colonels and great men that we had, Mel Swanson and Jim Wold, Pete Williams, saved his career a little bit. And last I won't talk about because they left us all in a lurch, all the SOG guys and everybody. So I have a lot of personal things that really bother me. But it was a job that was worth dying for, and that's what I felt like. The other guys, I think, probably felt that you just don't question it, you do it. And I'm so proud of what we did, and we did reverse a lot of bad things that were going on. And Jim Wold was the most excellent guy that I could think of to work for, and so that part was great. Some of the things the SOG guys did real quick, eldest son, they used to go in and doctor up ammunition and whatever to blow up. And then they'd sneak out there and exchange the information or exchange the packages. They had all that, had special people that made their weapons and everything else, so that when they would shoot their Chinese rifle, it'd blow up. Now, what's good ammo? What's bad ammo? These are serious little games that they would play, and it just goes on and on and on and on from there. So there are good books that you can see. Again, there are a lot of videos on military tales, and I wish that we had at least another half hour or so to go through this, and I'd like to have it. And Larry Warren, I'd like to have him talk, General Warren, just for a minute here.
Well, thank you, Don. Like everybody here, I've got some war stories I could tell, but in honor of Jon Goldenbaum over here, did a fabulous job, by the way, of summarizing all of that. To start with, right on. I'm going to just mention that I spent half of my tour as an NKP guy and half of my tour as a SPAD guy, so I guess I'm a half-breed, you might say. But I was in the 22nd when I first arrived, as another lieutenant, by the way. And the 22nd were known as the Zorros. You haven't heard anything at all about the Zorros today and yesterday. But the Zorros' mission initially was night flying over the trail at night, trying to find trucks and soldiers going up and down the trail at night. I'll make that just about it for that. We had Vietnamization going on in 1970. This is 2 years before many of you were there. And so things were being drawn down. The Zorros were discontinued in July. And another gentleman and I, Rich Engel, who was also a lieutenant at the time, who ended up with 2 stars in the Air Force, by the way. Rich Engel and I flew an E-model across the trail and went to Da Nang. I had no idea what the SPADs did. Well, not much of an idea. I'd heard rumors that they were in the thick of things and somewhat with the Army. But also, during some of the SARs that I participated in from the NKP side of the house, sometimes those SARs were conducted by both sides. I'd be at the TUOC, especially for the Boxer 22 SAR and the Wolf 06 SARs, which one was 3 days, the other one was 5 days in length. And we could hear the live action taking place in the TUOC, the Tactical Units Operations Center in the Con Phanom, and some of them were SPADs and some of them were Sandys. So anyway, to shorten the story, in order to go to Da Nang, you had to already be Sandy qualified, and you had to already be flight lead qualified, and Rich Engel and I both were, so we went over. They were getting short-handed because you guys all seemed to PCS about the same time. And several of us lieutenants, we lieutenants ended up being the primary cadre there for a little while. I'm so tempted to go down a rabbit hole with 2 or 3 other stories, but I now stand between you guys and going home. So I'll keep it relatively short here. One more thing that we were tasked with out of Da Nang that has not been brought up is that the Jollies, and we were sent to we had a standing remote SAR alert all the way down south in Benoit. And in the beginning of it, we were given to understand we were there for SAR purposes, and we were, but it was for Cambodia. And we eventually learned things that it was need to know, basically, and we didn't really have a need to know unless we launched, other than they told us, be sure you have your maps of Cambodia up to date. And we later learned that it was to do an emergency exfil of the folks who in the embassy over in Cambodia, should they get overrun. Because part of we had the Ho Chi Minh Trail coming down through Laos, but they were also resupplying up from the south, from the ports down in southern Cambodia. It was an extremely rewarding mission. I got to lead the flight with Secretary of the Air Force came to town, Secretary Siemens, in handing over some of the bases in South Vietnam. It obviously was not an important mission to this mission, but it was an honor, I guess I would say, to escort the Secretary, who was on board a Jolly, and just a rewarding tour. And you're going to take it? You better cut it out.
20 seconds, Don.
Okay.
You're standing between us and the bar.
Okay, I understand. Jim Wold, when he got the job of taking over our unit, he picked 8 lieutenants, 1 captain, 2 majors, and himself. Think about that. The infighting and the things that go on sometimes make you make choices. And I think we were damn proud of what we did, and we all fought like crazy, and we did not lose that many men. That's about all I got to say, I guess. Yes, sir. Oh, Spads with a Load, Doc Blanchard's song. You can get that on the internet, and it was generated, a bunch of drunks going ahead and writing, singing, trying to sing. I can't sing, I know that. And then it was improved on by Larry's group. Beyond that, much to Doc's surprise when we had one of our meetings. And we've had a lot of fun with that. We are a tight-knit little, I'd die for any of these men. And it's just, it is what it is. So thank you for your attention. It's been an honor to be here.
Let's go to the bar.
Are we ready? I'll start.
Thank you, Dean.
We'll play a little intro and then smile. Well,
Dean's
all
intro.
right here.
Shut up. Got it.
Fast mover start. All right, here we go. Take one.
The flash is ready.
Four blue 832s, all the lowest CBUs, 6,000 mini rounds, drives Charlie underground. We got 12 gross of 20 Mike. That's enough for any strike. We fly war machines by all means. Spreads with a load. 4 hours station time. Any less would be a crime. Fantastic PDA. 'Cause we drop on a dime. Tail dragging is the way. Scoop beats a blowjob any day. We fly war machines by all means. Stands with a load. We know every covey and every trail. All of their bullshit and all of their tales. Every ballpark and every team. And every team leader by the sound of a scream. We make 20 passes on the deck. Take some hits, but what the heck? We fly war machines by all means. Spads with a load. Fast movers in the night means search and rescue at first light. Hey, beeper, come up, voice. Now get your young ass on that horse. We took big air bursts on this SAR. This could be my silver star. We bring Charlie Grease by all means. Stands with a load. I see an F4 taking off and I start to think, why don't they move it? Why don't they jinx? Seems like every song I've been on since I've been down.